Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. Kicking off 2020 with a new episode with Dr. Myriam Juda. Myriam is a circadian rhythm researcher and consultant. She's based in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is in Canada, north of the US. Now, Myriam is from Luxembourg originally, has studied in Europe in places like Germany. She then moved to Vancouver to undertake some postdoctoral research at University of British Columbia, and now works conducting research at Simon Frazer University at the Department of Psychology as a research associate. In conjunction with this position, Myriam also has a business called Circadian Light Therapy, where she works with companies and groups around shiftwork, chronotype, and performance. I've known Myriam for not too long, actually, probably about a year. And then this year we met in Vancouver at World Sleep. And we've also been collaborating on a scientific research advisory board for Fatigue Science, his company has wearables and software and so on. And so we've been discussing issues around chronobiology, circadian rhythms, shift work, and so on in those meetings, and then also outside as well. So I really wanted to have Myriam on to talk about this area because we haven't had too many chronobiologists on. So it's a really interesting conversation. Now, Myriam's been quite vocal recently on the Canadian well, not the Canadian government, but the people of British Columbia, and probably the government of British Columbia changing from daylight savings onto a permanent daylight savings time. So they wanted the clocks changing. So in this episode, we discuss the health effects of changing clocks throughout the year. So summertime and wintertime, clocks going forward and back. So whatever country you're in, you might have different terminology on this. Myriam speaks about why this is actually bad for our health. We also discuss what's best in the future in terms of leaving on one time or another. Talk about exposure of light at different times of the day in terms of mental health, performance, your basic physiology. We also discuss, is it better to sleep at night or during the day for shift workers? And we also digress a little bit here and talk about some of Myriam's work as a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Psychology at the University of British Columbia, where she actually kind of switched out of her shift work area from her PhD and went back into more psychology, looking at the social cognition and social learning in children between the ages of 3 and 6. So a slight digression there in our conversation, but nonetheless, we do come back to circadian rhythms after that brief digression for a few minutes. So this is a very interesting episode. It's something that affects all of us. We're all affected by light. We all see light. We all need light. We are diurnal animals affected by the light and dark cycle day to day. So if you are alive and you are upright, this is going to be of interest to you. And if you're a shift worker, this will be of interest to you as well. If you don't like dark winter days, this will be of interest. And if you like bright summer days, this will be of interest. So there's something in here for everybody. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. And we'll see you at the outro. This episode is brought to you by E3, the champion formula. So if you are looking for a nutrition aid for endurance events, you might want to check out E3. E3 is a Perth-based business, and I have personally used E3 whilst running ultramarathons. I've used this on the Ultra Trail Australia 100k race. I've used this during the Leadville 100 miler, and I've also been using it for the last couple of years during long distance swims. Now, for those of you who may have had E3 before, it's back and back with a bang. We have a discount code for you today as well if you would like to avail of this for Sleep4Performance listeners. The discount code is WANS0001. Now this will give you 5% off your 1 kilo bag of E3, the champion formula. This discount, or the monies collected from this discount, goes straight to the Type 1 Diabetes Family Centre here in Perth, Western Australia. You may remember a number of months ago I had Beck Johnson on from the Type 1 Diabetes Family Centre. So all of the money raised from these discounts goes straight to that centre. So that's a great organisation if you'd like to support them. So that's E3, the champion formula. Now, if you want to get your hands on a bag of that E3, you can head over to Fuel4Sport. That's the number 4 sport, like Sleep4Performance, where you can order your bag today and apply that discount code. So that's fuel4sport.com.au, and the guys over there will sort you out with a couple of bags of this and have it delivered to your home, to your office, or wherever you hang out during the day. And if you scroll down there, you might want to have a look, because I've just found out today that my ugly mug is sitting on the E3 Champion Formula website. So, yeah, there you go. So, check out E3 Champion Formula and apply that discount code. That's WANS0001 and get your 5% off your 1 kilo bag today. Welcome back to Sleep4Performance Radio. Today I am talking to Dr. Myriam Juda. Is that how you pronounce your name, Myriam? I can pronounce nobody's name on this podcast.
It's Juda.
Juda.
Myriam Juda. Yeah.
Juda. Very good.
Yes.
So just as a bit of a background to everybody, I met Myriam for the first time probably back in September when I was in Vancouver for World Sleep, the conference where about 3,500 sleep geeks got together. And Myriam was at that conference, and also myself and Myriam have collaborated on some work with Fatigue Science as part of their scientific advisory board. And we spent a day together as well after the conference as well. So you may hear Myriam's accent is slightly different than mine. Myriam, do you want to tell the listeners where you're from? Because you're from a very famous country.
Yeah. So I'm from Luxembourg.
Radio Luxembourg. This is like a Radio Luxembourg show.
500,000. Sorry, what?
I said this is like Radio Luxembourg.
Exactly. Yeah. Radio Luxembourg is from Luxembourg. That's right. Yeah, it's a very small country, about 500,000, and we do speak Luxembourgish. So we have our own language, and that's what my accent is.
Luxembourgish. So how do you say good morning in Luxembourgish?
Moyen.
Oh.
Well, you can say moyen, and you can say bonjour. So you have a choice. One is more Germanic and the other one is more French. And that's exactly what Luxembourgish is. It's a mixture between German and French.
Gerange. That's what we should call it. Or Freeman. So you grew up in Luxembourg. Obviously, people of our generation and older would remember Radio Luxembourg for that famous radio station in Europe they used to listen to at nighttime. And now the last time we met Myriam, we discovered that Radio Luxembourg is now online, and you can actually just go to a link and listen to Radio Luxembourg. It's no longer pirate radio station.
I should do that too.
Now, the last time we spoke, Myriam, I was asking you lots of questions about Luxembourg. Have you brushed up on your history?
Yeah, please don't do that again. No.
The last time we met, I peppered Myriam with loads of questions about the background of Luxembourg, and she was on her laptop going, I don't know. I'm working here. Leave me alone. So, Myriam, when you were at school, did you always want to be a sleep scientist or a circadian biologist, physiologist, or what was the goal?
No, I don't think I really had a very specific goal when I was in school or when I was in high school. It's more once I started going to university and I was really confronted with what are actually my interests. I realized that psychology is something I'm very interested in, and then once I started studying psychology, I truly realized that is exactly where my passion lies. And so it started with psychology, and I've always been really drawn to biological explanations of behavior. Yeah. So I took courses in like biopsych and like cognitive psychology, neuroscience, evolutionary psychology. So at first, I actually specialized in evolutionary psychology, so explaining human behavior from like an evolutionary perspective through natural selection. And also comparative psychology, so comparing humans to other species. So that's where it started. And then when I moved to Germany, actually for personal reasons, to Munich, and so Till Ronneberg, who is a quite well-known circadian rhythm researcher, in Europe, he was researching like social jet lag and chronotype. He had just got big grants and was looking for PhD students. So I just came. It was really actually kind of like a coincidence. And I went for an interview, and it went well. And it was a paid position, so that was interesting to me at the time. And So I did my PhD with him, and then, right away it sounded interesting to me because it is, again, like explaining behavior from a biological perspective, the sleep-wake cycle. As humans, we are diurnal. So I thought that was very interesting, and then my PhD was in shift, like studying shift workers and their sleep-wake cycles, and looking at chronotypes and how do chronotypes deal with working certain shifts, and how do we even chronotype shift workers. That's how I got into sleep research. Although I wouldn't consider myself a sleep researcher, I would consider myself a chronobiologist.
Right. Lots of things in there, Myriam. Got lots of questions there for you. So number one, you kind of fell on your feet there by getting involved with Till Honenberg, because he would be probably one of the leading scientists in the chronobiology shift work area in the world. His name is plastered over every second paper, and you won't get far into the chronobiology research without seeing his name somewhere. So you kind of you were very lucky to walk into his sphere and study with him. So that's
right. Yeah.
That's obviously an argument that there's no free will. You were just determined to go there.
Maybe.
but when we talk about this word chronotype, and this is a question I often get as well. What is the difference between a person who is a chronobiologist, would say, or someone who looks at chronotypes? What's the difference between a chronobiologist and a sleep researcher? How would you describe that?
Yeah, so sleep researchers, traditionally, they come from the field of medicine. I think that is, so we have like different parents. We come from different parents. So sleep research coming from medicine, and then chronobiologists coming from biology. So I think that is a starting point that differentiates us. And then a sleep researcher, to me, is somebody who works in a sleep lab and actually studies brain activity during sleep. So the different brain stages, different sleep stages, and things like that. Whereas the chronobiologist studies the timing of biological events. So they're quite different. So things like, when do we sleep and when are we awake? We don't need to address the different stages of sleep or even the function of sleep. But more the timing of it. That's how I would say this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I often get asked, myself, where's your research interest lie, or what's your work like in terms of sleep work? And I go, well, I've done some sleep laboratory work or classic sleep research work where we do polysomnography in a lab and we look at sleep stages and we look at this classic sleep architecture and what's going on. But then we've also validated some technology to be used in the field in we would say the chronobiology field. And then probably 80% of my work is field-based, where we're looking at things like biomathematical modeling, we're looking at shift work, we're looking at light exposure, we're looking at timing and type of tasks, we're looking at risk per hour, we're looking at the rotation of a task, we're looking at the rotation of a shift or a roster, we're looking at travel schedules. And I would say to people like myself, it's probably more classic chronobiology than sleep research, underpinned by healthy sleep science. That's how I would describe it, and that's a long way of describing it. But I'm reluctant to put myself in any one camp. But it sounds like, from your definition, I'm probably more on the chronobiology side than the sleep research.
I would agree with you on that. Yeah.
So where do I sign up to get this title of chronobiologist? Do I have to get registered? Can you authorize me now, Myriam? No.
Well, I think you can call yourself you have a PhD. I think you can call yourself a chronobiologist. If that is what you prefer to be called, I think that's okay.
My wife and other people just call me an idiot sometimes, so that's probably more apt. So yeah, anyway, we digress. But so the area of chronobiology and looking at chronotypes is very popular, particularly in Europe and probably North America and in Canada. Is it that type of research that led you to move to Vancouver, or did you just want to get colder compared to Europe? Were you looking to go worse, or why did you?
Well, it's actually the climate is milder here than in most places where I lived in Europe. So, but we're having a really awful week. It's been raining for like 4 days, and I'm really questioning why I really wanted to move here in the first place right now. No, but it is a wonderful city, and I did move here because after my PhD, I got a grant and I could choose where to go, basically, and I chose Vancouver. The reason I chose Vancouver is because I did my undergraduate studies here, so I studied psychology here. After high school, I came here, and I just really like Vancouver and Canada. Really? So, and in the meantime, I've become Canadian also, so I call this home.
You call it home now? Yeah.
Yes, I call it home now.
It's interesting you say you're having a bad week in Vancouver, because here in Western Australia, we've just had a bad week because we've had multiple days over 40 degrees. And it's extremely difficult. Today is probably the first cooler day we've had at 26, 27. And it's a welcome relief. So there you go.
Yeah.
Polar opposites happening at the moment.
Yeah, exactly.
So Myriam, you pushed on with your sort of postdoctoral research. You went to Vancouver, and you went to a university here called Simon Frazer University. Is that where you started, where you are now?
First, actually, I went to UBC, and I did different research, actually. I did research on, again, in more in the field of evolutionary psychology, so the evolution of social cognition. I was interested in why we have the ability, we call it theory of mind, why we have the ability to take the perspective of other people, which seems to be quite a uniquely human ability. And the question is, what are the factors that were pushing for that in human evolution? So I studied, something quite different, but I studied, I basically went to a lot of daycare centers, and I had children play economic games, and I looked at, one of my theories was there was pro-sociality and cooperation, the evolution of cooperation that pushed for social cognition. So I had children play economic games, and I tested their social cognition to see if there was a link. So it was quite different. But then after that, I got interested again in researching circadian rhythms more in sleep, and I started Circadian Light Therapy, and that got me to meet up with Rolf, and I was very interested in doing lighting intervention studies, because I do feel that there's a lot of knowledge that we have acquired in the last 20 years in chronobiology that we could start applying, and one of them is improving lighting conditions. So I was very interested in doing research in that area.
So you went from your PhD into chronobiology, sleep world, then you flip back to classic psychology, we'll say, into that psychology field, and then flip back into circadian rhythm research again. Oh, very interesting.
That's right. I have a broad interest. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I think
maybe I needed a little break after my PhD.
Maybe. Look, I'm a fan of broad interests. As people who know me, I've studied all different types of things, and I get fascinated by different streams. And one of these things here you've actually mentioned, it actually is pretty interesting, because this thing here between the age of 3 and 6. I'm just going to digress slightly on this for a second, but. You play, when you say you played economic games with them, what did you do? Did you get these kids to sit down and play Monopoly and see if they got mad? Is that kind of what you did?
No, they were more like trust games. So the game was, goodness, I hope I remember all the details, but we played with stickers, and children really value stickers. So the goal is generally that they really want stickers, and they want to get as many stickers as possible. And so this game, what they were doing is that they were playing with an opponent, which was one of the research assistants, and they got 4 stickers, and there were 2 baskets, and they could distribute the stickers as they wanted. They could either put all 4 into one basket, or split them to 2, or 1-3. So it was a child's decision. And then the opponent would choose one of the baskets for her, and then the child would get the remaining. So the smart decision would be to do 2-2, because you'd assume the opponent would take the basket with 4 stickers if you distribute them 4-0 or 3-1, that the opponent would take the 3 stickers. And then we would play multiple rounds like that. So that's like a classic trust game, we call it. So do we trust, and does that change over rounds depending on the decision of the opponent? And so one of the factors we were looking at was learning. So they saw first somebody else play with that same opponent, so they could kind of see, is the opponent a selfish person or is it a generous person? And they could copy what they were just seeing before. Or they could use their own strategy and try to maximize the amount of stickers they would get. Or they could be egalitarian and just always choose 2-2. And one of the things I was interested in is how does a child's ability to take the perspective of somebody else influence their behavior?
Very interesting. I'd like to see that happen maybe with some 30 to 40-year-olds in the workplace. That might be quite interesting as well.
That's what economists do. They run studies like that with adults. Yeah.
This is quite interesting because I don't know if you have this show in Canada that you've maybe have seen, but there's like a show that was on in the UK, and I think it was developed off the back of a PhD student, which is like the secret life of 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds, and they have these kids come into a daycare center every day, and they basically film them at the center, and have these child psychologists actually comment on what's happening in the groups and how the groups are forming and about sharing. And I don't know if you've seen that show, but they've also made an Australian version of it as well.
Okay. No, I haven't.
Now they've ran another study as well based upon some work, I believe, that was happening in the Netherlands. Now I could be getting this wrong, where it actually put kids, kindergarten age kids, like 3, 4, 5-year-olds, into old folks' homes, and they found that when they put the kids into the old folks' homes or retirement homes, whatever the correct terminology is on them, that the older people basically got more positive, mental health improved. They actually got stronger. They were more mobile. So there's all these like positive effects of as well. So that's why when you're talking about some of this research with young kids, I'm kind of fascinated with that age group because it's quite an interesting time in their development, but also as well quite insightful of how that child's going to be when they're older. Now I don't have kids, but if I talk to nephews or nieces or friends' kids that are that age, you can kind of see the character come out between the age of 3 and 6, and it's really interesting to watch it develop. So I'm kind of a bit slightly fascinated with your research here in terms of these type of subjects, but also as well, how difficult was it to deal with 3 to 6-year-olds and get them to basically comply with a study?
Oh, they love games and they love stickers, so that was no issue at all. Yeah, no, they were very happy playing with us. And I had a team of young students also who were very good interacting with children. No, that was not an issue we had. It's a wonderful place to work, I find, going to daycare center, and kids are very energetic and excited to participate. It was great.
So I got one last question before I flip back to the sleep part, because people will be going, "Oh my God, why do kids love stickers? What is it about a sticker that a child loves?"
It's a really good question.
Do you have the answer?
I'm not sure. We know as psychologists that children will always try to choose to get they've never, it's very rare that a child will be like, no, I don't want a sticker. So that's why we use it. With adults, we actually have to use real money to motivate to motivate them to participate in those economic trust games, and also for their behavior to be kind of generalizable. But I think it's, owning something. It's pretty, it's colorful. They can stick it anywhere. They can show it off. It's a little material property that they can own. But I don't know what it is specifically about stickers.
Yeah, well, I've got a great nephew. I'm old enough to have a great nephew. And when he was about 3 or 4 years of age, he said to his mother said, she goes, if you don't stop doing that, you're not going to get a sticker. And he just looked at her and said, he just looked around and went, I don't care if I never get a sticker again in my life.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that actually made her mad, not him. And I thought, he's absolutely played her. And he's only like 3 or 4 years of age. And he used to get stickers and putting them on his hands. And he'd walk around with stickers on all day, and he'd be showing everybody his sticker, just like in a random coffee shop. So I'm always interested in why these kids love stickers.
Yeah. No, I definitely use stickers with my children too, to motivate them to clean up, to do homework. It's worked so far. But the day they come and they will say, no, I don't want a sticker, I'm going to have to get a little bit more creative. Yeah.
Well, that's good, Myriam. The next time I see you, I'll bring you a book of stickers. Anyway.
Exactly. Always. Yeah.
we're going to get back onto the topic of sleep, because this is not a psychology podcast. I need to start a new podcast called Tangents. But anyway, so you started up a business in 2016 called Circadian Light Therapy. At the end of postdoctoral research you were doing with the kids. Why did you start that business, and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so I wanted to provide expertise in circadian rhythms and in the use of light specifically to affect circadian rhythms. So initially my goal was, still now, is to provide services for businesses, but I also do consulting for individuals as well. So sometimes there's people who want to improve their sleep, or people who have shift workers, for example, or people who have certain sleep issues, especially people who are really night owls. So they can benefit a lot from using light at specific times of the day. So that's the kind of consultations I do give. And for businesses, I do things like assess shift workers' circadian rhythms by means of actigraphy, to see, are they early birds, are they night owls, how long are they sleeping in certain shifts, when am I expecting them to be most fatigued, and then provide aggregate group data to management to show them exactly what is going on with their shift workers.
So Myriam, this is an interesting one, because we're actually running a study at the moment with sort of what I would say classic middle-aged amateur athletes, average age being about 39 and a half, let's just say 40. Many people self-report verbally that they would be a morning type. So for people listening, there's a morning type, there's an intermediate, and then there's a late chronotype or an evening chronotype. So you basically got those 3 buckets. You got the larks, the intermediates, and the owls. Many people say they're morning types. Then when they're assessed with the chronotype questionnaires that Professor Taylor Ronenberg has developed, or other people have developed, they generally come out as being actually moderate morning or actually intermediates. And then their actigraphy would suggest, this is the wrist-worn devices, that they're probably more evening type people. So when you get those type of differing perspectives from groups or individuals, how do you use that data, which can be sometimes contradictory, to actually give a true assessment of a chronotype, and then to give some good advice to the person as well?
Well, my research, generally the actigraphy correlated very well with people's self-reports, I gotta say. So I don't find that the different measurements are so different. But obviously, when there's always the issue when you have to assess yourself, you compare yourself to your family and your friends, and you might be an early bird compared to the rest of your family, but actually compared to the population, you're not. So that might affect it. But generally, I do find that they correlate quite well.
So you don't find a massive difference between them, no?
I don't, no. Not at least on a group level, right? On a group level, when you, of course, you're going to have certain individuals that are just really outliers and are not assessing themselves properly. And then, of course, actigraphy can be flawed as well. It's very hard with actigraphy to really, show when a person is, not moving versus sleeping. So people might be just watching television, and we think they're sleeping. So there's these issues as well.
Yeah.
But overall, on the group level, they always, in all my research, they were always correlating significantly, and they were correlating very well. At least with the MCTQ. So, I'm not sure with the morning and evening questionnaire. It generally doesn't correlate as well to other measures. But the MCTQ, the questionnaire that we developed in Munich for day workers and for shift workers, correlated significantly with actigraphy and also with melatonin assessments and cortisol assessments. So,
sorry, Myriam, what questionnaire was that? Did you say?
The Munich Chronotype questionnaire, the MCTQ.
MCTQ, yeah.
So that is using the midpoint of sleep on your free days as a way to assess your chronotype.
And then, Myriam, another question that often gets asked is, which is the best chronotype? Are you better off being a morning type person or an evening type person, or a lark or an owl? Which is the best, or is there a best?
Yeah, so I think generally what we see nowadays is that we see more health problems with night owls, and it's not because being a night owl is bad for your health, but because night owls are just exposed to more circadian disruptions due to work schedules. So there's something that we call social jet lag, and it is when you are forced to be up during a time when you're actually not supposed to be up. So when you, for example, sleep much later on free days than on work days, that is something that we call social jet lag, this discrepancy in your timing of sleep. So we do know that your melatonin rhythms or cortisol or body temperature, they correlate much better to your timing of sleep on free days as opposed to timing of sleep on work days. So when you are going to work, that is the time you are misaligned if it is very different from the times that you are sleeping on free days. And the social jet lag is correlated to a number of health problems, such as fatigue. So if you have to get up at a time when your melatonin is still high and you're still supposed to be sleeping for another 3 hours, you're going to be fatigued, even if you had sufficient amount of sleep. And also in the long run, it is a predictor for cardiovascular disease and diabetes and even obesity, some forms of cancer, depression. And then also social jet lag is always associated with sleep deprivation. So when you do sleep out of your ideal, time for sleep, then generally you don't sleep very long. And we see that with shift workers. So shift workers, they, on average, don't get much sleep during the day when they come home from the night shift, simply because their circadian rhythms are keeping them up. It's very hard to sleep during the day. And then vice versa, in the early morning shift, it's very hard to get enough sleep because in order to get your 7-8 hours of sleep, you'd have to go to bed at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. And that is a time where it's very hard to fall asleep. We call it the wake maintenance zone in chronobiology. So It's one of those times where your physiology is just very alert, and it's very difficult to fall asleep unless you're very sleep deprived. So most shift workers are just simply not getting enough sleep if they have to get up at 4 a.m. for an early morning shift or 3 a.m. because they can't fall asleep before 10, 11 p.m. and then they're sleep deprived.
Yeah. So Myriam, you will come across this a lot, and many of our listeners actually work as shift workers. There's people who listen to this podcast or fire brigade, or and they might be training for Ironman as well, or maybe doing running events as well. So they want to try and balance shift work with their health. So one of the questions that we often get from shift workers is why they would perceive that after night shift they actually sleep better during the day than they do on nights, and so as in at nighttime. And whilst the actigraphy might show a lot of awakenings during the day, and whilst they might have some disturbances, they would self-perceive that sleep is better during the day, and that they have kind of, in air quotes here, they have virtually flipped their circadian rhythm. Why do you think people have this perception? And then also, do you think that's actually true?
No, I don't think it's true.
Yeah,
and when you look
I.
at the and when you do look at the sleep duration, you see it's really it's extremely short during the day. That said, there are a few exceptions. There's people who do sleep 6-7 hours, but generally what you see are like 4 or 5 hours of sleep after a night shift. And the shift worker might feel like they're getting a good sleep because they were so exhausted and sleep deprived, and there was the sleep pressure that was kicking in. So they've been up for a very long time, and so most likely sleep latency was very short, so they fell asleep very quickly, and because they were so exhausted, they probably were sleeping really well. But when you actually look at the sleep duration, it is very short and not sufficient for the sleep that we do need.
Mm. Now, Myriam, recently in Vancouver in Canada, you have been garnering some fame from being on the TV and the radio and so on, talking about daylight savings, which many people have a love-hate relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's across the world. We have the clocks changing at different times of the year.
Yep.
You made some commentary on it. Before you make some commentary on this as well, and let the listeners know what's going on with daylight savings, can you maybe tell us, or do you know, why daylight savings exists, or why we have it in our society? Why do the clocks jump forward and back?
Right. Okay. So I'm not an expert in the history of daylight saving time, but I do know that it is not, that there's this misconception that it was farmers who insisted on it. Apparently that's completely wrong. It was never the farmers that pushed for daylight saving time. The purpose was to save energy. So the idea was that there would be more daylight after work, and people will use less electric lighting. So that was that was the idea. And also, I heard something about the person who pushed for daylight saving time really loved playing golf and really wanted to have that extra hour of daylight to play golf. So, but I'm talking about stories that I have heard. I've never researched this. But the daylight saving, the energy efficiency is the official reason for it. And there is also research that has looked at this and has shown that actually we are not even saving energy with daylight saving time. So there's really no reason we still have that. And we do know that, first of all, most people really don't like daylight saving time. They don't like switching the clocks. Most of us are affected by it, especially when we're transitioning from standard time to daylight saving time in the spring. It cuts an hour of our sleep, but also what happens, and what a lot of people are not aware of, is that we now suddenly have to get up a whole hour earlier, physiologically speaking. And the reason for that is because our circadian rhythms are aligned to the light-dark cycle of the sun, and not to our social schedules. And what daylight saving time does is that it moves all our social schedules, and most importantly, the work start time and school start time, a whole hour earlier in relation to the light-dark cycle of the sun. So now we have to get up earlier. And in the summer months, most of us, our circadian rhythms are earlier than in the winter months. So we're not as affected by it in the summer. But when winter comes, and especially if you live more north or also east of a time zone, then, west of a time zone, not east, west of a time zone, a lot of us are actually misaligned under daylight saving time. Even under standard time, there's a certain misalignment that we see. So we see that within one single time zone, when you look at people's sleep, people who live west of that same time zone are getting less sleep, and they have more social jet lag than people who live east of that time zone. And the reason is because the sun rises east, and there's about an hour difference in the timing of sunrise. And on average, most people get up at 7 a.m. for work during the work week. However, people who live west of that time zone are actually getting up a whole hour earlier, physiologically speaking, than people who live east of that time zone. And that affects their sleep. So it cuts sleep by about half an hour. There's this social jet lag, so you expect more fatigue. And then what is really interesting too, research lately has shown that, all the negative health outcomes that we see in shift workers and that we've shown to be consequences of sleep deprivation and social jet lag, where you see increased rates of these health issues in people who live west of a time zone as opposed to people who live east of a time zone. So higher rates of cardiovascular disease and diabetes and depression.
Very interesting. I also sat in on a presentation by Kenneth Wright, who's in Boulder.
Right.
And he presented some data on this as well from around North America and looked and even from Europe, and showed some similar information as well. I think you were presenting in the same session, if memory serves me right.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to look at that, because what Kenneth showed as well was that basically over the year, even with the clocks changing, you're not actually getting more sunlight. In some cases, you actually might be getting less light exposure. And so it's this kind of misnomer that when you change the clocks forward and back and so on, that you're actually maximizing light. But in some cases, you're actually getting less hours of light exposure across the year.
That's right.
Which I found really fascinating, that you might be just getting a big, exposure for like 3 or 4 or 5 months of the year, but for the rest of the year, you're in a deficit of light exposure. So it's not actually helping you. And if we're so connected to the light-dark cycles of the planet, why aren't we being synchronized to this? So in general then, Myriam, is it fair to say that regardless of the location you are in the world, that daylight savings or changing your clocks at any time is a bad thing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We should get rid of the time change. But now the question is, if we get rid of the time change, on what time should we be? And I think, chronobiologists have pushed for like decades, I think, that we stop the time change. I think it never occurred to anyone that people or the government would actually choose to go on permanent daylight saving time, because it just seems so illogical to us. So when that started, I think a lot of us were really surprised and we're shaking our heads. And this is exactly what is happening right now. So we have a lot of governments that are talking to move to permanent daylight saving time, and this is what is happening here in British Columbia. So British Columbia has actually put a poll out earlier this year because they wanted to get people's feedback, and they only provided 2 options for voters. It was either continue the time change, or the other option was I'm in favor of getting rid of the time change and remain on permanent daylight saving time. So if you don't know any better, of course you're going to choose the second option to get rid of the time change and remain on permanent daylight saving time. But they did not provide an option for permanent standard time. So they're using this poll to move forward with this, and actually moving forward legislation right now, so that the province in Canada has the option to go on permanent daylight saving time on their own. And so they went forward with this. And so that's where I started to write an open letter to the BC government. So I should mention that I did write to them before as well, but they did not seem very interested in the science, and were never consulting with circadian rhythm specialists or with people who know how light affects physiology. So when I saw that they were just moving forward, I decided that it's time that I write an open letter that is signed not just by me, but by other experts. So I got Ralph Misselberger, who's a circadian rhythm researcher at Simon Frazer University, and also somebody from the other universities, so UBC, the University of British Columbia, from the Sleep Clinic, and also the director of the Mood Disorders Clinic in Vancouver, and Canadian Association for Ergonomists, and also the Canadian Society for Chronobiologists to sign. And then decided, we sent it off the weekend of the time change. I decided to let the media department of our university know about it, and then it went out to a lot of journalists, and that's where I realized how many interviews you can give when you do something like that.
Yeah, you got very famous very quick in Canada. So the vote has happened in BC.
Yeah, so it wasn't really a vote; it was a public poll.
Yep.
But it was the most popular public poll that has ever happened in British Columbia. So it was something like 230,000 people that responded to this poll. It was huge. And it was like 93% were in favor of abandoning the time change. So 93% of people voted for permanent daylight saving time. At this point, we don't know how many people would have voted for standard time. And this is one of the big criticisms I have. And obviously also, if you don't think much about it, or if you don't know about this, you're not going to think that makes a difference. And a lot of people like the idea of getting more light in the evening, because under daylight saving time, especially in the winter months, the sunset is so early here in Vancouver. It is dark. I'm looking outside right now, and it is dark, and it is 4:30.
Yeah.
So people are hoping to get an extra hour of light. They're thinking of, maybe, doing some activities with their children. And I understand that I like long days myself. If I had a choice, I would prefer longer days. But for our circadian rhythms, this is really not a good idea. Especially what it will do is that the sunrise in Vancouver won't happen if we were on permanent daylight saving time in the winter months. So in December, right now, we wouldn't see the sunrise until 9 a.m. in Vancouver. And in other areas of British Columbia, it wouldn't be until like 10 a.m. So we would have to get up in the pitch dark at 7 a.m., go to work. Sunrise will only happen once we are at work and once children are already at school. So it really, we barely will get any light exposure in the morning. And then on the flip side, we're going to get more light exposure in the evening. And that we know from circadian rhythm research will make our circadian clock drift. Right?
Yeah, because we're better off having the bright light exposure early in the morning for synchronization and for better health and mental health, as opposed to late evening exposure.
So one for depression, we know that light is much more effective as an antidepressant in the morning than it is at other times of the day. But also for our circadian clock, has a tendency to drift. It is on average longer than 24 hours if we are in a bunker. So what happens is that when we're not getting enough light exposure, we're all becoming more night owls. And this is something that you can see even under standard time. You can see people in Vancouver, or we studied this in lots of different areas of the world, that their circadian rhythms are just getting later and later and later over the winter, and the reason is because they're getting less light exposure in the morning. So we see that already under standard time, but under daylight saving time, this would get just so much worse, because we would get even less morning light exposure and we would become even more night owls. And then on top of that, not only are we night owls, but we now have to go to work a whole hour earlier than compared to standard time. So we're expecting that this would cause a lot of social jet lag.
Very interesting. So Myriam, it's okay. You mentioned there about across the year, that sleep will change. So a couple of things there on what you said. With the light exposure in the morning, in the summer, is this why people generally feel better in the summer than in the winter, because they have more light exposure in the morning? So that's the reason why. And then also as well, is it completely normal to have different sleep duration across the year? So for example, and I'm one of these people, in the summer right now in Western Australia, I start waking up between 5:30 and 6 o'clock. I start kind of opening my eyes. I might drift back, but I'll generally be fully alert by 10 past 6 most days. In the winter, it could be, if I'm left to my own devices, it could be 7:30 in the morning. Yeah. And then my sleep will change. And I tend to sleep more in the winter than I do in the summer. And that's just from a natural perspective. Like it's not based upon the clock really, as in an alarm clock. But if I was just to kind of free run, I would probably sleep in excess of 8 hours in the winter, and then in the summer it tends to go back to between 7 hours, 7 hours 20 on average. Is that normal for people to do that?
Yeah, and it's really important to separate the work days from the free days there. So what we do see is that people are becoming later in the winter months, especially in areas where the days are shorter. So the shorter the day, the more that you would observe this effect that people are getting later in their circadian rhythm, so more night owls. But what happens is that if they have strict work schedules, you actually generally see that they're not getting enough sleep during the work week. During the winter months, they're getting less sleep during the work week than in the summer months. But on free days, they're really catching up. So they're sleeping much longer on free days. And overall, you see that sleep duration is changing there are seasonal variations in sleep duration. So there's a publication that we published, like about, when was it? Like 2013, 2012, around there, where we showed those seasonal fluctuations and the mid-sleep, so the timing of sleep, and also sleep duration. And it definitely, on free days, is definitely increasing the sleep duration in the winter months compared to the summer months.
So Myriam, at the start of this podcast, before we start recording, you said, 40 minutes is a long time. We've been speaking now for 50 minutes.
Oh, are you serious? Oh,
yes.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Good. I didn't think we were. Yeah.
There you go. You see, you thought we wouldn't have anything to talk about, and there we go. So Myriam, I know it's your afternoon, it's our morning here in Western Australia. I want to thank you very much for making yourself available to come on. This is an area that I have a great interest in, as you know, from my work perspective and research perspective. So I appreciate you sharing your insights on circadian rhythms and chronobiology. It's very helpful to me as well, and I'm sure many of our listeners will enjoy this conversation. So thank you very much for.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, Myriam, if people want to get in contact with you to either do some research projects or they want to get you involved to assess the shift work, chronotype of the chronotype of their shift workers, or want any advice, how can people get in touch with you? How can people follow you? Are you on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all this type of things?
Yeah. So they can get, so I have a website which is called circadianlighttherapy.com. And there's an email, I think it's called info@circadianlighttherapy.com, so they can contact me that way. I also have a Facebook site for Circadian Light Therapy, where I'd say like on a weekly basis, I post something a little bit more often, sometimes a little bit more often, sometimes a little bit less often, but I do post interesting posts, scientific, new science, on the topic of circadian rhythms, and especially when it concerns use of light. And then I'm also on Twitter, although I'm new to Twitter, so I'm not really sure what I'm doing on Twitter. But it is Myriam Juda. You should be able to find me on Twitter that way.
Excellent. All right. Well, the only advice I give to you about Twitter, Myriam, before you go is don't start looking at nighttime, because you'll get sucked into a debate with people, and there's lots of trolls on Twitter, and that will affect your social jet lag and thereby reducing your sleep and thereby affecting your mental health and performance the next day. That's my only advice for you with Twitter.
Yeah.
So don't get sucked into that vortex. Myriam, thank you very much for coming on today. Really appreciate it. So yeah, we will put all that information for your website, Facebook, Twitter, etc. into the show notes. And until next time, sleep well.
Yeah, you too. Well, you have your day is only starting. So,
it's only starting.
Yeah, you have a good day. Our circadian rhythms are very different right now.
Thanks, Myriam.
All right, bye, Ian.
Cheers. So, thanks to Dr. Myriam Juda for her time today on the podcast. Really appreciate that conversation with Myriam, and I hope you got something out of that. Myriam listed off a number of ways you can get in contact with her, through her research activities or through Circadian Light Therapy, her business. We'll put all those links in the show notes below, so you can scroll down there and have a look at those on your podcast app, or go to our website, the number 4performance.com.au to get all those show notes there as well and more. And if you want to contact me, it's Ian Dunican at sleep4performance.com.au. And if you'd like to get in contact with us to do some work around this in terms of occupational health and performance, sleep and performance work, you can contact me at Melius Consulting, MELIUS consulting.com.au. So that's Ian.Dunican at meliusconsulting.com.au. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, anywhere else you can find us as well online. You're more than welcome. We'll put it there. Jump onto the website to sign up for our one newsletter a month, our one email a month, because we don't spam you with just one thing a month, and we can send out a wrap up of everything that's happened in the previous month if that's easier for you to do. Also, as well, if you are enjoying the podcast and you think it's worthy, please head over to iTunes and give us a review there. Or if you have any feedback on the podcast, let us know as well. Any subjects you want us to discuss, to dig into, anything you'd like us to improve, just let us know. We'll do our best to make that happen. Until next time, sleep well.